I was house sitting for my grandma one weekend while she went on a trip to Florida with some of her church friends. Staying in her house alone was something I had done before, but this time felt different. The house was old, full of creaks and groans that made it feel even more eerie in her absence. My grandma's house had always been a comforting place when I was a kid. My cousin and I would have sleepovers there, playing games late into the night and waking up to the smell of pancakes in the morning. But now, as an adult, the house seemed to have taken on a different character, one that was less welcoming and more sinister. The guest bedroom where I was staying was on the ground floor, right next to my grandma's room. It had two twin beds, one of which I always chose because it was right next to the window. Before settling in, I made sure to check all the doors and windows, ensuring they were locked. I knew the neighborhood was safe, but there was something about being in that big, quiet house alone that made me cautious. After making sure everything was secure, I got into bed. It was still early, so I spent some time on my phone, scrolling through social media, watching videos, and texting my friends. The familiar glow of my phone screen was comforting, distracting me from the unsettling quiet of the house. But as the minutes passed, I started to feel uneasy, as if I was being watched. It started with a sound, faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the house. It was a voice, soft and distant, saying, "Hello." I thought I might have imagined it, so I paused the video I was watching and listened closely. There it was again, a woman's voice, calling out from somewhere outside. My heart began to race as I got out of bed and slowly made my way toward the front door, trying to pinpoint where the voice was coming from. It was late, well past midnight, and I couldn't think of any reason someone would be outside, let alone calling out like that. The voice grew clearer as I approached the door, and I realized it was coming from the front porch. My grandma's house didn't have a peephole, so I crept over to the dining room window, which offered a view of the porch. The blinds were drawn, but I carefully peeked through a small gap, trying to see who was out there. That's when I saw her, a woman, probably in her late 50s or early 60s, standing on the porch. She was staring directly at the window, as if she knew I was there. Her appearance was unsettling. Her clothes were worn and dirty, and her face was gaunt and pale, with deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. She was smiling, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was cold, almost predatory. "Hello," she said again, her voice carrying an eerie calmness that sent a shiver down my spine. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. Who was this woman, and what did she want? It crossed my mind that she could be one of my grandma's friends, but why would she be here at this hour? And why wasn't she knocking on the door or ringing the bell? The situation felt wrong, and I had no intention of opening the door to find out more. I returned to the guest bedroom, closing the door behind me and hoping that whoever she was, she would leave. For a while, the house was silent again, and I started to believe she was gone. But just as I was beginning to relax, there was a sudden loud banging on the window, so forceful that it rattled the glass. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing as the banging continued, followed by that same unnerving voice. "Hello," she called out, louder this time, as if she knew I was inside, hiding from her. The fear that gripped me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My mind raced with thoughts of what she could do if she got inside. Summoning all the courage I could muster, I grabbed the blinds and yanked them up, ready to confront whoever was out there. But the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. The woman was standing just inches from the window, her face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide with an unnatural intensity. She didn't flinch or back away when I looked at her. Instead, her smile grew wider, more sinister. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, hoping to scare her off. But she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me with that terrifying smile. I couldn't bear to look at her any longer, so I dropped the blinds and ran out of the room, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I locked myself in the upstairs guest bedroom, hiding under the covers like a scared child. I didn't want to actually call the police, partly because I was scared of what might happen if I did. What if she got inside before they arrived? What if they didn't believe me? So I decided to wait it out, praying that she would leave. Hours passed, and eventually the house fell silent again. I waited until the first light of dawn before I dared to go downstairs. I checked every window and door, making sure they were still locked. The woman was gone, but the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The next morning, I called my grandma and told her what had happened. Her reaction was immediate and filled with panic. She started yelling into the phone, her voice trembling with fear. She told me that a few days earlier, she had been at the grocery store when she noticed a woman following her. This woman was younger, perhaps in her late 40s, and she kept smiling at my grandma in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. My grandma had tried to avoid her, but the woman seemed to appear in every aisle she went to, always with that same unsettling smile. It had shaken my grandma so much that she left the store early, but she hadn't thought much of it until now. As she described the woman, I felt a chill run down my spine. Could it have been the same person? The thought terrified me, but I didn't want to worry my grandma more than she already was. I tried to reassure her that everything was fine, but the truth was, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. My name is Ethan, and I'm currently a freshman at a university in upstate New York. It's a decent school, but the surrounding area has a reputation for being a bit rough. After a messy breakup with my first girlfriend, I decided to try my hand at online dating, hoping to meet someone new and move on. I downloaded an app and started swiping, eventually matching with a girl named Jessica. Jessica was also a student at the same university, and we clicked almost instantly. We shared a love for reading, going to the movies, and even had the same sarcastic sense of humor. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up for a movie date. She suggested we meet at a specific spot near campus, and she would pick me up from there. It seemed a little odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. At around 9 p.m., I found myself standing on a quiet street corner, waiting for Jessica to arrive. The neighborhood was one of those places that seemed deserted at night, with only a few flickering streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I checked my phone, noticing a text from Jessica asking me to share my location so she could find me easily. I obliged, sending her my location without a second thought. A few minutes later, a car turned onto the street and slowly approached me. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, and as the car pulled up in front of me, the driver's side window rolled down. But instead of Jessica, there was an older man behind the wheel. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s, with a face that bore the marks of a hard life. He asked what I was doing out here alone, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. I told him I was waiting for someone, hoping he would leave me alone. But then he asked, "Are you waiting for Jessica?" I nodded, feeling a growing sense of unease. "Yeah, how do you know her?" I asked, my voice betraying my suspicion. He claimed to be Jessica's father and told me to hop in, saying he would take me to meet her, but something about the situation didn't feel right. He looked too old to be her father, and his story didn't add up. I decided to trust my instincts. "Why didn't she tell me you'd be picking me up?" I asked, trying to sound casual but firm. His response was weak. He said something about not trusting a random guy to meet his daughter and wanting to check me out first. But the more I looked at him, the more I realized something was very wrong. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there. Without saying another word, I turned and started walking away. The man called after me, sounding surprised and almost desperate, but I didn't look back. I kept walking, picking up my pace as I headed towards the campus. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see his car following me. As I reached the next intersection, I noticed a car parked on the side of the road with its lights off. It looked eerily similar to the one the man had been driving. I quickened my pace, hoping to get back to the safety of campus as quickly as possible. Then I got a text from Jessica, or rather, the person pretending to be Jessica. "Why didn't you get in the car with my dad?" The message read. My stomach dropped. I knew now that something sinister was going on, and I was right to trust my gut. I didn't reply to the text. Instead, I started running, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that car as possible. My mind was racing with thoughts of what could have happened if I had gotten into that car. The thought of being driven off to some unknown location by a stranger filled me with terror. I reached campus and ran straight to my dorm, locking the door behind me. My roommate wasn't there, so I had no one to talk to about what had just happened. I sat on my bed, trying to calm down, but then another text came through. This time, the message was full of anger and malice. "You're lucky you got away," it read. "If you'd gotten in that car, I would have made sure you never saw daylight again." My hands were shaking as I read those words. The person I had been texting wasn't Jessica. It was someone far more dangerous. I blocked the number immediately, knowing I needed to report this to the police. But I was still in shock from the whole ordeal, and I wasn't sure what to do next. The thought of what could have happened if I had been less cautious still haunts me, and I hope that no one else falls for the same trap. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of that man, heard his voice asking me to get into the car. I kept my phone by my side, half expecting another text, but none came. The next morning, I went to the campus security office and showed them the messages. They assured me they would look into it, but I could tell they didn't take it as seriously as I wanted them to. Weeks have passed since that night, but the fear hasn't left me. I've become more cautious, more wary of strangers, and I no longer use dating apps. The experience has left me shaken, but also grateful that I trusted my instincts. It's a reminder that not everyone you meet online is who they say they are, and sometimes listening to that little voice in your head can save your life. When I was 18, I took on a part-time job as a janitor at my old high school during the summer. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid well, and I was saving up for college. The job came with its perks: flexible hours and the occasional chance to work alone, which I didn't mind. There was something oddly peaceful about wandering the empty hallways after everyone else had gone home. The school had been my home for 4 years, but it felt different in the summer. The once bustling hallways were now silent, and the classrooms, which had been filled with chatter and laughter, were empty and still. The building had a way of taking on a life of its own when it was empty, and sometimes that life felt a little too real. One night, my supervisor, Mike, had to leave early, leaving me to finish the shift on my own. He gave me the usual instructions: lock up when you're done and text him if you need anything. I had done this before, so I wasn't worried. In fact, I was looking forward to having the place to myself. One of my tasks that night was to move some extra chairs from the gymnasium down to the basement storage room. The school had hosted an assembly earlier that day, and the chairs needed to be put away. I grabbed a stack of 6 chairs and made my way down to the basement. The basement was a part of the school that I had never liked. It was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The air was damp, and the whole place smelled musty, like old books and stale air. The storage room was filled with old art supplies, including mannequins covered in dusty cloths. I had always found the mannequins creepy, with their lifeless forms frozen in unnatural poses. I dropped off the first stack of chairs and went back for more. When I returned to the basement, I noticed something strange. One of the mannequins that had been covered earlier was now exposed, the cloth lying crumpled on the floor next to it. A sense of unease washed over me. I was sure that the mannequin had been covered when I was there earlier. I texted Mike, telling him that I thought someone might be in the basement. His reply was quick, telling me that no one else should be there and to call the cops if I felt unsafe. But I didn't want to call the cops. I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting, so I decided to check it out myself. I approached the cloth that was now lying in the corner of the room, partially hidden in the shadows. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The cloth was moving, just slightly, as if something underneath was breathing. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, frozen with fear. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I just stared at the cloth, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But then the cloth shifted again, and I saw the outline of a human figure beneath it. Panic surged through me, and I turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I texted Mike again, telling him what I had seen. He responded by telling me to confront whoever was down there, but there was no way I was going back. I locked up the school and went straight home, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next day, I told Mike a watered-down version of what had happened, leaving out the part about the figure under the cloth. I didn't want to admit how scared I had been. He didn't press me for details, which I was grateful for. But the experience left a mark on me. I still think about what or who was hiding under that cloth, and the fear that gripped me when I realized I wasn't alone in that dark, creepy basement. It's a memory that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still down there. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the image of that moving cloth burned into my mind. I never went back to that basement, and I was relieved when my job ended and I could leave the school behind. But the fear didn't leave me. Even now, years later, I still get chills when I think about that night. What was under that cloth? Was it a person? A ghost? I'll never know, and maybe it's better that way. Some things are best left unanswered, but that doesn't stop the questions from haunting me. Love creepy stories? Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Our email is in the description. Please send in your horror stories.